Hey guys, it's Lotus and welcome back to another video. Today we're gonna continue on with our read-along of Erha. Let's jump right into it. Chapter 130, Shizun, I've crossed 5 years to come see you. Chuaning's breathing was a little heavy and his throat a little dry. He refused to give in just like that and opted instead for being difficult. Holding down the fire raging in his chest, he asked, mild as ever, "For as long as you live?" "For as long as I live." "I might walk very fast with no regard for you." "That's all right, I'll chase after you." "I might not want to walk anymore and just stand there." "I'll stand with Shizun." Agitated by his unhesitating answer, Chuaning swept his sleeves and said, "Then what if I just can't walk anymore?" "Then I'll carry you." Chuaning, ... Moran paused, realizing that might have been a little disrespectful, rude even. Eyes widening, he hurriedly waved his hand and amended, "I'll carry you on my back." Chuaning's heart beat faster and faster, and it took everything he had to hold back the urge to help this man up, to touch him. He furrowed his brows at this urge, looking anxious and a bit cross. Who wants to be carried by you? Moran opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. His Shizun was just difficult like that. Didn't want to be carried on his back or in his arms. It wasn't like he could carry him lifted up over his head, and he certainly couldn't drag him on the ground. He felt like he was too dumb to figure out how to make Chuaning happy. At a loss, his head drooped, like an abandoned stray dog. He muttered in a small voice, "Then I'll stop walking too." ... "If you want to get rained on, then I'll keep you company through that too." Chuaning was at his wit's end from this relentless onslaught. He was so used to doing everything by himself that he blurted out without thinking, "I don't want your company." Moran finally stopped talking. From where he was standing, Chuaning could only see his wide forehead, dark eyebrows, and a pair of long eyelashes that were downcast and quivering slightly, like curtains rising and falling in the wind. "Shizun!" Moran had misunderstood the feelings behind Chuaning's agitated refusal. He asked, "Are you still mad at me?" Drowning helplessly in the pounding of his own heart, Chuaning didn't quite catch what he said, and so only replied, "What?" "Back in the underworld, I already apologized to Shizun many times, but I know it's not enough. I spent every moment of these past 5 years feeling guilty. I know I owe you." Chuaning, ... "I want to do better too, so that I won't feel too dirty to stand before you, so that I'll at least be able to lift my head in front of you. But I can't catch up to you. Every day when I wake up, I worry if I'm dreaming, that you'll be gone if I were to wake up from that dream. I keep hearing the words you'd said at Jincheng Lake when you were saving me, that the most wonderful dreams are rarely ever real. And then I just get so sad." Moran's voice grew a little hoarse. He still had some things to say, but he didn't want to say them. He didn't feel like he had any right to keep talking about these things in front of Chuaning. Didn't have the heart to let Chuaning know what had happened in these last 5 years. Sometimes, all alone in the snow valley, he couldn't tell what day it was, or even where he was. He'd prick himself with a needle then, again and again, between the joints of his fingers. It hurt, but that was how he could tell that he was still conscious, still alive. That was how he could tell that he wasn't still in his previous life, dreaming all of this up. That when he woke up, it wouldn't be to Sishong Peak stripped of all familiarity, a Shuema with eyes full of hate, and a Rufeng sect that had been demolished to the ground. That if he were to go to the Red Lord's pavilion, he wouldn't see Chuaning lying there, looking as if he were still alive. As if he were still alive. As if he were still alive. Which words could hurt more than these? It was strange, now that he thought about it, when he'd found out that Chuaning had died to save him, and when he'd gone down to the underworld on that rescue mission. His heart had ached then, but not with the kind of irrepressible despair that he felt now. But as time went by, day after day, as it came closer and closer to the time for Chuaning's awakening, Moran only felt the pain growing worse, like there was a knife cutting into his heart. Maybe it was because he had too much time to think in those days he spent alone. Or maybe it was because, during that time without Chuaning, he had tried so desperately, even hysterically, to imitate that person, to the extent that he wanted to tear himself apart entirely to reassemble into Chuaning's form. Whatever the reason, Many things that he had never really paid attention to or thought about, things that he had gradually forgotten, all of it resurfaced in his mind. Those things of the bygone past were like waterlogged shoals exposed in the wake of the retreating tide, and he stood all alone at the shore, but the waves were already gone. He could see it all so clearly now. He thought about the past life, surrounded by the beacons of war on all sides, at the end of his road. Shuemeng had come to Sisheng Peak, and in a Wushan palace changed beyond recognition, Shuemeng had interrogated him with tears in his eyes, demanded to know why he had done this to his own Shizun. Shuemeng had tried to force him to turn back before death. He had said, "Moran, think back properly. Let go of your vicious hatred. Look back. He once trained you in cultivation and martial arts, and made sure to protect you. He once taught you how to read and write, taught you poetry and painting. He once learned how to cook just for you, even though he was so clumsy and got cuts all over his hands. He once waited every day for you to come home, all alone by himself, from nightfall till the break of dawn." Moran hadn't listened back then, had refused to look. Now he stood at the coast of fate, where the tide had receded, and when he looked down, there was a lost heart under his foot, a heart that had once been so good to him, so genuine to him that it had nearly driven itself to death. But he had been so set in his ways that he had seen none of that as he trod it underfoot. He had trod Chuanning's very heart underfoot just like that. A chill ran through Moran's body whenever he thought about it. What had he done? Just what had he done? 2 lifetimes, 16 years, had he ever repaid Chuanning's kindness? Had he ever, even just for one day, put Chuanning first in his heart? Damn beast! Was his heart made of stone before? How else could it have not hurt? These past 5 years, how many times had he dreamt of Chuanning's return, in robes white as snow, looking just the way he'd used to? When he woke, the pillow would be wet, and every single day he would say, "Chuanning, Shizun, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Every day he would say it, but it never lessened the guilt any. Later on, when he'd seen the blooming flowers of spring, he would think of him, and when he'd see the falling snows of winter, he would think of him as well. Later on, every daybreak was golden like Chuanning's soul. Every nightfall was dark like Chuanning's eyes. Later on, every beam of white moonlight was like the snow on his sleeves. Every rising sun was like the warmth in his eyes. Later on, he'd seen Chuanning's silhouette in the vermilion clouds by the horizon, in the cerulean light of dawn, in the surging, billowing clouds. He was everywhere. Because of this anguish and yearning that he'd felt, he'd gradually grown less resentful about being lowborn, gradually felt less strongly about his near-fanatical adoration of Shimei. One day, outside Snow Valley, he had seen a snow-covered white jasmine growing out of a crack in the wall. He had gazed at it quietly for a while, thinking the same thing he always did. He had thought, "Ah, what a pretty flower! Shizun would definitely like it if he could see." It had been such a cursory thought about the simplest, most casual and unimportant little thing. But between one breath and the next, all the sorrows that hadn't managed to drive him out of his mind and force him to his knees back when Chuanning had died, suddenly rushed toward him all at once. The saying went that 1,000-mile-long levee would be destroyed by mere ant tunnels. He broke down all of a sudden. He bawled miserably, startling geese into flight from the depths of the valley. His cries were hoarse and ugly, a disgrace to the golden blossom that was blooming despite the snow. It had been 5 years, but he had never once forgiven himself. "Shizun, sorry. I really tried my best to make it back in time today, and even had a present for you so that I wouldn't be empty-handed when I saw you." The forced composure finally faded, the feigned ease finally collapsed. Kneeling in front of Chuanning, Moran finally fell apart. Truth be told, it was only in front of Chuanning that the Moran of today would let himself fall apart like this. Still really stupid. I couldn't even manage the first thing I promised you after your revival. It's my fault." Chuanning could hardly bear to see him like this. He had always adored Moran, and now that they had finally been reunited after such a long time apart, of course he didn't have the heart to watch him be so miserable. But hearing his words, Chuanning hesitated before asking, "Why didn't you get back in time today?" "There actually was enough time to make it back, but I ran into some fiends making trouble at Butterfly Town, so I got held up clearing them out. Sorry. Moran kept his head down. Not only did I get held up, but even the present I had prepared for Shizun got destroyed. I also got blood splattered all over myself, so I rushed here to wash it off, only to... Chuaning could feel his heart going soft. Mo Zhongshi. This Moran was indeed nothing like how he used to be 5 years ago. The Moran of 5 years ago had been a selfish brat, but now he knew the weight of things. Chuaning wasn't one to obsess over things like festivities and indulgences. In fact, if Moran had seen the demon problem at Butterfly Town and had chosen to ignore it, Chuaning would have been furious at him. But looking at this man kneeling before himself now, all honesty and clumsiness as he asked for forgiveness, Chuaning instead found him to be so dumb it was kind of cute. Chuaning stepped forward slowly, a warm feeling flowing in his heart. He reached out and was just about to help Moran up when he heard him mutter, "Shizun, please don't kick me out from the sect." Now it was Chuaning's turn to be taken aback. He didn't know the depth of Moran's guilt and remorse, so he hadn't expected Moran to say something like that. Hesitatingly, he said, "What?" "Even if you don't want me to stay with you or chase after you when it rains, even if you don't want me to carry you, even if you don't want any of that, even still, please don't kick me out." Moran finally lifted his head. Chuaning's heart tremored. He saw the faint redness in the rims of his eyes, and the way his eyes were a little watery. Chuaning was usually firm and decisive, but now he found himself at a complete loss. You're 22 already. Why are you still... He paused and let out a long sigh, then said, "Get up first." Lifting an arm to rub forcefully at his eyes, Moran said stubbornly, "I'm not getting up if Shizun doesn't want me." Still a scoundrel, all right. Chuaning could feel a headache coming on. Lips pressed into a thin line, he grabbed Moran by the wrist and hauled him up. But the moment the tips of his fingers made contact, all he could feel was the strength in those muscles and the heat of his skin. The firm body of this young man was also nothing like how it had been when he was younger. Just one touch made Chuaning's heart pound right out of his chest, and he let go abruptly, caught off guard. Luckily, Moran was currently too distraught to notice Chuaning's strange behavior. But Chuaning stared at his own hand in disbelief for a moment while I cannot talk today, while bewilderment raged within. Just what was wrong with him? Had the 5 years of slumber undone all the asceticism and reservations he had? But then, looking up at Moran with astonishment, or was it because this person in front of him had really changed too much, so much so that it made it hard for him to control himself? Moran worried his lip for a bit, then seemed to make up his mind to be obstinate about it, to be so obstinate that he couldn't be kicked out. "Please don't kick me out, Shizun." He made to kneel back down as he spoke. How could Chuaning possibly risk having to help him up a second time? He hurriedly stopped him with a stern, "Don't you kneel again. I'll really toss you out if you do." ... Moran paused and blinked, and then suddenly figured it out. Eyes lighting up, he said, "Shizun, you aren't blaming me? You're not mad because I didn't make it back for the banquet? You..." Chuaning snapped. "Have I ever been that petty?" Moran excitedly tried to hug him. Chuaning was spooked to say the least, hastily taking a step back and scolding with a frown. "What do you think you're doing? Where's your propriety?" "Ah!" Realizing his mistake, Moran apologized in a hurried, Sorry, I forgot myself for a minute." The tips of Chuaning's ears were bright red even as he tried to play it cool. "Already in your 20s and you still don't know your manners." The tips of Moran's ears turned red as well as he mumbled, "It was my bad." "It was my bad" was practically his catchphrase at this point. Hearing him say it, Chuaning felt a little mad, a little amused, a little pitying, and a little warm. Eyelashes flickering upward, he secretly stole another glance at Moran from the corners of his eyes. He saw a tall, handsome man with sun-kissed skin. Perhaps it was because of the lingering steam from the hot spring, or perhaps it was due to something else altogether, but his cheeks were a little flushed and a little warm, and he seemed to practically glow with the vibrancy of youth, so bright as to vaporize the steam in the air, making that pair of dark, shining eyes seem all the brighter. Badump. Chuaning felt his own heart thud against his ribcage, and the tips of his fingers felt as if they were on fire again, like earlier when he had touched Moran. His throat was suddenly incredibly dry, and he dared not look at Moran again as he muttered, "Idiot," and turned to leave. But the barrier above him didn't even shift. Moran really did chase after him, just like he had promised. Chuaning dropped his eyelids and didn't dare look back, well aware that he could no longer hide the love and desire in his eyes, just as it was impossible to cover up the burning at his fingertips. He had finally ruined him. This man had done everything that the Moran of 5 years ago couldn't, had taken his heart and drowned him in the ocean of lust. Henceforth, Chuaning would be a mere mortal, with a body of flesh and a soul defenseless against desire, trapped in a web, unable to escape. Author's notes. Mini Theater, Shizun's back-to-school quiz. Chuaning, come, let's play a round of Trivial Pursuit. Don't worry, these are all easy questions you can score on. Dog, okay. Chuaning, how many petals does Hai Tang have? Dog, 5. Chuaning, what species of Hai Tang are the ones in Red Lotus Pavilion? Dog, midget crabapple. Chuaning, Shimei's height. Dog, 183 centimeters. Chuaning, Xuemeng's height. Dog, haha, 178 centimeters. Xuemeng, what's so funny? Chuaning, your height. Dog, haha, 189 centimeters. Xuemeng, oh. Chuaning, my height. Moran, 181 centimeters. Chuaning, adequate, you passed the test. I won't kick you out from under my tutelage. Thanks, Meatbun, for that cute little mini theater. Moran was really hesitant because he didn't want to accidentally upset Chuaning. But yeah, to recap chapter 130, Moran is like, please don't kick me out, Shizun. Are you still mad at me? And Shizun is like, no, I'm not mad, but my heart is going doki doki and I can't control it. Oh no, what is this feeling of lust that I'm suddenly feeling towards you? This cannot be. I have separated myself from worldly matters and desires. How could I suddenly have lustful feelings towards you? And Moran is just thinking, Shizun, as long as you want me, as long as you'll keep me, I'll be with you forever. So, he really broke down Chuaning's walls after all. Chuaning is finally stripped bare and defenseless against Moran 2.0. Okay, let's continue on with the next chapter. Let me just take a sip of water first. Okay, chapter 131, Shizun does some reading. That night, Chuaning lay in his bed in the Red Lotus Pavilion, tossing and turning, unable to fall asleep. He was contemplating how Moran had ended up growing into the man he was now. Mo Zhengshi, Mo Wei Yu. All he could see when he closed his eyes were that man's handsome features and those bright, steady eyes that held determination and tenderness both. Chuaning cursed under his breath and vehemently kicked the quilt off the bed, then proceeded to starfish in bed while staring up at the roof beams with a tormented gaze. He tried all that he could to get out from the ocean of lust, to cut off the threads of desire, tried until he was exhausted. Mo Wei Yu, you bastard, he mumbled. He turned his head away, but couldn't escape the thoughts. It was almost as if that hot, firm body from Miaoyan Springs was right in front of him still. He could see the broad shoulders, the defined contours of his back, and the way the water had slid down slowly along his V-cut abs when he turned around. He jolted up from the bed, face ashen, and dared not finish that thought. He grabbed the first book his hand came into contact with, like it was a lifeline. How unfortunate for Chuaning to have led such a respectable life, only to now be reduced to having to resort to books to distract him from his inner demons. He didn't even know which book he had grabbed out of all the ones that Xuemeng had brought, but the pages were covered in densely packed rows of tiny writing. Chuaning's eyes glazed over the words without really taking anything in at first, and it wasn't until a while later that he suddenly realized just what it was he was reading. On that thin paper was written a very neat line of words: size ranking of the cultivation world's young heroes. Chuaning knew the words individually, but they didn't make very much sense together. Young heroes, size ranking? What size? Height? Reading further, there was a side note in small writing. This observational ranking is not a comprehensive listing due to the fact that some of the young heroes never bathe outside or visit the pleasure districts. The following individuals are missing from the ranking: Nan Gongsi and Shu Shuanglin of Rufeng Sect, Jiang Shi of Gu Yueye, Xuemeng, Shei Fengya, and Chuaning of Sisheng Peak. What? Chuaning blinked. What was that supposed to mean? Surely their heights were pretty obvious even without bathing outside or going to the pleasure districts. And there was even a passing mention of himself. He furrowed his brows and put his finger on the list to keep track as he read on, only to choke at the very first name on the list. Mo Wei Yu, status, Gongzi of Sisheng Peak, Mo Zhongshi. Chuaning thought briefly about Moran's figure. To be fair, he had gotten quite tall, but surely not so tall as to rank number 1. Reading on, it said, seen when bathing at Deyu Hall, an absolute unit, truly awe-inspiring. Oh my gosh, Shudru, no! ... Bathing at Deyu Hall, absolute unit? Something felt vaguely off to Chuaning, but he was really too pure of mind and couldn't figure out why exactly it felt even after dwelling on it for quite a while, so he could only keep reading. The person ranked second was a wandering cultivator he'd never heard of before, and written to the side was, seen when bathing in the forest. Mighty. What even is this gibberish? Chuaning was a little put off. It's true that shoes and hairpieces could add to a person's height, but it wouldn't really be much of a difference. Why go so far as to peek at people bathing? Why would this kind of trashy book would be so popular? Then he saw the third name. Mei Han Shui. Status, direct disciple of the Kunlun Tashui Palace sect leader. The text to the side was different this time. Instead of seen when bathing, it was measured by one of Chunying Pavilion's girls and corroborated by a number of women from the cultivation world. Mei Gongzi's endowment could leave a lady so pliant that her body would be as water and her bones as mud, and could also readily do 10 people a night. Chuaning, ... A long moment passed in dead silence. Then, Yu Heng Elder's head exploded into a droning buzz. Face red hot and gaze flickering, he flung the booklet across the room with great vigor like it was a hot potato, beyond incensed. What did he just read? What size? Even if he was dense, he wasn't that dense. What other size could it be? Filthy, shameless, indecent, disgraceful. Still mad even after sitting in bed stiffly for a long while, Chuaning got out of bed and picked up the booklet just to explode it into a million tiny pieces with the pulse of spiritual energy from his fingertips. But, like a glowing hot branding iron, the words, absolute unit, truly awe-inspiring, had already been seared into his heart with a hiss, leaving his face flushed and his heart thundering. He was a very proper, very upright person. Earlier at the Miaoyan Springs, he had very consciously kept his gaze up, without so much as a glance in the general direction of any place he wasn't supposed to look at. And besides, all that steam made everything so fuzzy that he wouldn't be really able to see anything even if he had looked, anyway. But now this filthy book had managed to, in just a few words, paint the very image right in front of his eyes. And more than that, words often lent themselves even better to the vivid imaginations of the mind than pictures did. Absolute unit. Chuaning dragged his hands down his face, and then, after a long pause, grabbed the quilt and pulled it over his head. It was only his first day out of seclusion, and he had already had the misfortune of suffering all that. Chuaning thought bitterly. The time sure had changed. He'd almost rather lie back down and go back to being dead. But still, Yu Heng Elder had always held himself to high standards, and so, even though he barely got any sleep all night, and despite how aghast and unsettled he felt inside, he still got up on time the next day, got washed and neatly dressed, and then drifted gracefully down from the southern summit of Sisheng Peak with an expression that was nothing short of dignified and restrained. Today was the day for the sect's monthly assessment. The platform of sin and virtue glinted with flickering light, reflected off the light armor worn by the thousands of disciples going through their martial arts drills under the appraising gaze of the elders sitting at the high platforms above. Though he had been gone for 5 whole years, Chuaning's seat was still right where it used to be, next to Shui Jianyang, to the left. He walked up the blue stone steps wearing white robes that dragged on the ground and a weary expression, took the empty seat with a sweep of those broad sleeves, and then leisurely poured himself a cup of tea to sip on while watching. Noting his sullen expression, Shui Jianyang thought that Chuaning was mad over Noting his sullen expression, Shui Jianyang thought that Chuaning was mad over Moran missing the banquet last night, so he leaned over and coaxed in a low voice, "Yu Heng, Ran'er's back." But contrary to expectation, All that earned him was a scowl twitching between Chuanning's brows and an even more sullen expression. I know, I already saw him. Ah? Already saw him? Xue Zhengyang nodded after a pause. Great, so what did you think? He's changed quite a lot, eh? Chuanning didn't exactly want to talk about Moran, considering the fact that he had been cursed with the words, absolute unit, truly awe-inspiring, being repeated over and over and over in his head since yesterday. Nor did he plan to look for Moran in the sea of people below, so he looked down at the table. That's a lot of fruits and pastries. Xue Zhengyang grinned. You haven't had breakfast yet, have you? Go ahead and eat up. Not even bothering to hold back for decorum's sake, Chuanning picked up a Lotus crisp to eat with his warm tea. The Lotus crisp had a nice pink gradient from the base of the petals to the tips, with a filling of red bean paste inside the crisp, flaky layers that carried the refreshing sweetness of osmanthus flowers. These taste like the work of Rynnamonrolls bakery, Chuanning murmured, then turned to Xue Zhengyang to ask, they weren't made by Mengpo Hall? Nope, Rynn brought these back just for you. Xue Zhengyang replied with a grin. See? The other elders didn't even get any. ... Only then did Chuanning finally realize that the wooden table in front of himself was the only one that was laden with all sorts of fruits and snacks, from pastries to sugar desserts. There was even a small porcelain bowl the color of jade that, when he lifted the lid, turned out to be holding exactly 3 sweet tangyuan. Rather than the usual kind made with white glutinous rice, these tangyuan skins were mixed with the lotus root powder, a Linnan specialty, so that they were clear and translucent, and the color of jade. Oh yeah, Rynn borrowed the kitchen at Mengpo Hall this morning to make those. The red one's filling is rose and red bean paste. The yellow one is peanut sesame, and the green one's apparently got some fancy tea-based skin made with powdered Longjing tea. Interesting new things, these. Too bad there isn't more. Xue Zhengyang mumbled. They're really fancy and all, but he spent all morning and only made the 3. Chuanning. ... You hum, is that enough for you to eat? Chuanning was quiet for a moment before nodding. Actually, every time he ate tangyuan, he only ever ate 3. The first was sweet, the second had a nice aftertaste, the third was enough, and a fourth would be too much. It was a lucky coincidence that Moran had just so happened to make exactly 3, no more and no less, just the way he liked it. Scooping up one of the adorably round lotus powdered tangyuan in the porcelain spoon and holding it by his lips, Chuanning felt like it was just the right size too, perfect for eating in one bite, unlike the ones Mengpo Hall made for the Lantern Festival, which were so big that they stuck to his mouth and took quite some effort to chew. The person who had made the tangyuan seemed to know exactly how much his mouth could hold, the exact size the food needed to be in order to fit comfortably in his mouth, and even the gooey filling seemed to be mixed with untold intimacy. The thought made Chuanning's heart flutter for some reason, right before it got squashed by shame and swept under a semblance of cool composure. He's a pretty good chef. Too bad he only made them for you. No one else gets any, not even this uncle of his. Xue Zhengyang sighed ruefully. Chuanning said nothing, only pressed his lips tightly together as he listened, stirring idly at the soup in the bowl with the spoon. The tangyuan was all gone by now, the perfect amount of sweetness spreading out slowly in his heart. Once done with the food, Chuanning paid no mind to the spirited drills got down below, opting instead to pick up a book from the table to read about the recent happenings at Sisheng Peak over the last 5 years. These things that were all managed by Xue Zhengyang, so they were simple and straight to the point, and Chuanning finished reading through it all in no time. He went to close the book, but then noticed another book under that one. What's this? He picked up the thread-bound book. It was very, very thick. Xue Zhengyang glanced over and said with a grin, Another present from Rynn. He was too embarrassed to give it to you personally because he accidentally got some blood on it while taking care of some fiends last night on his way home. And some pages got ripped too, so he asked me to put it on your table this morning. Chuanning nodded and flipped open the book, slender fingers trailing along the cover. On it was written in a neat, straight script, Dear Shizun. His eyes opened fractionally wider in surprise. Letters written to himself? His heart suddenly felt like it had been singed by fire, hot and painful. He lifted his eyes to look for Moran in the sea of people below, but saw only endless rows of glistening armor like light reflected off the scales of leaping fish. Unable to find him, Chuanning could only turn back to the letters. Moran had missed his Shizun for every single day of his seclusion. He had lots of things he wanted to say and worried he wouldn't be able to remember them all. so he had a sturdy book made, a thick one with 1,825 pages in total. For each day of the 5 years, he would write Shizun a letter about whatever happened, big or small, from the particularly gross-tasting leaf-wrapped sticky rice cake he had the misfortune of eating to the insights he gained from cultivation training that day. He wrote it all down. He had originally planned it to have exactly 1,825 pages, no more and no less, so that the day he finished writing the last page would be the day Shizun came out of seclusion. But sometimes he couldn't stop writing, the words pouring out ardently in tiny handwriting squeezed onto the page, like it wanted nothing more than to show Chuaning the sea buckthorn flowers of outer Mongolia and the hazy fog surrounding Changbai Mountain as well, like it wanted nothing more than to tuck the delicious sweets tasted that day between the pages to share with Chuaning when he woke up. The pages were lined with rows upon rows of the tiny writing. There was nothing too sentimental, nor did he include anything sad or upsetting, putting in writing only the happy, brilliant moments of the 5 years, setting down only the good to share with him. And so the originally planned 1 page per day ran out, and he had to attach a thick stack of letters to the back of the book. Chuaning flipped slowly through the book, his eyes a little wet. He watched Moran's handwriting go from childish to neat to elegant. The ink on the most recent letter had not yet dried, while the earliest page had already turned yellow. And on every letter, the words, "Dear Shizun," were a little different. Slowly, gradually, from light and brisk to sure and steadfast, until toward the end, it flowed like a painting, yet could cut through metal, each confident stroke an art unto itself. Flipping to the last page, Chuaning touched the words on the cover again. "Dear Shizun, dear Shizun." Looking at the neat handwriting, it was almost as if he could see the tip of Moran's writing brush lifting from the paper, could see him settling it down before lifting his head, no longer the youth of the past. From the first letter to the last, it was almost as if he could see Moran growing up, from 16 to 22, his figure becoming taller, his features growing defined. And, every day without fail, he would sit down at the table and write a letter addressed to him. "Shizun!" Without him realizing, the drills had ended and there was someone calling for him. Chuaning looked up to see Xuemeng waving excitedly at him from the very front of the platform of Sin and Virtue. And next to Xuemeng, a tall man with broad shoulders, a narrow waist, and a pair of long legs stood quietly, his face flushed from the drills and a sheen of sweat covering his forehead, sleek as a panther's coat under the sun. Seeing that Chuaning was staring at him, Moran paused and then broke into a smile. In the golden light of morning, his smile was bright and mesmerizing, like the gentle swaying of sun-bathed cypress. His eyes were filled with warmth, his lashes were dipped in gentleness, and that strong, spirited face seemed a little bashful, so vibrant and fiery as to steal one's breath away. How very handsome he was. Keeping his expression carefully neutral, Chuaning crossed his arms where he was sitting on the high platform as he looked loftily down toward him. To anyone looking, he would appear cool and collected as usual, but little did they know that in the truth, his thoughts were actually in utter chaos, his insides tied into a million knots of flustered panic. Grinning amidst the crowd, Moran suddenly lifted a hand and pointed at his own clothes, then at Chuaning. ... Not understanding, Chuaning narrowed his phoenix eyes and looked back at him in confusion. Moran grinned even wider, before cupping his hands around his lips and wordlessly mouthing something at him. Chuaning. Huh? The morning breeze danced through gently rustling leaves. Moran stifled an exasperated smile and shook his head, then tapped at the front of his own robes with a finger. Chuaning looked down. A beat later, his ears suddenly turned red. ... Under the guidance of his disciple, the esteemed and dignified Yu Heng elder finally realized that, this morning, in his hurry to get ready, and due to the mess of clothing heaped together at the Red Lotus Pavilion, he had unwittingly put on the robes he had accidentally borrowed from Moran last night. No wonder it felt like there was something dragging on the ground behind him as he walked today. It was the hem of the robe. Mo Wei Yu, the nerve of you. Chuaning turned his face away in a huff. You tactless bastard, why do you only ever say exactly what you shouldn't? End of chapter. Author's notes, mini theater, the contents of Dog's letter. If we speak of the ancients composing letters, letter to Yuan Wei alone is considered very grossly sentimental. I can't help but applaud Sir Bai Zhuyi and Sir Yuan Zheng's friendship. Ha ha ha. Dog's letter isn't as sophisticated, and he won't know how to be as eloquent as Bai Zhuyi upon opening a scroll, like the sappy Wei Zi Wei Zi. or our hearts as intimate as if they were bound together by glue. So what did Dog write? Selections from Dog's letter. The almond candy of Lin Yi is yummy, but a little pricey. Half a kilogram costs 40 copper coins, but it's so yummy. Pork stew with potatoes is very filling after one meal. I won't get hungry during that night. It is yummy. Accidentally mistook the honey in my chenkun pouch for oil and brushed it onto roasted chicken wings. It is yummy. The fish grown in Guangzhou is really yummy. It is yummy. When Shizun wakes, let's eat these together. Oh, that's so cute. So pretty much a big portion of Moran's diary to Chuaning is just him talking about all the delicious foods he's encountered, how yummy they are, and how much he wants to take Chuaning on a trip to sample them later when he wakes up. Okay, so to recap chapter 133, Chuaning wakes up and he still cannot believe that he has lustful feelings towards Moran. He can't believe that the disciple he remembered from 5 years ago is this dashing, strong man of today. And he's trying to just clear his mind. He gets up and he wakes up and accidentally puts on Moran's robes again, but doesn't realize it until later. And he makes his way to the training ground to go talk and chat with Shui Zhengyang. And when he gets there, there's a whole table full of pastries just for him. Moran brought back a bunch of nice flowery pastries for him, and he also made him homemade tangyuan. He made him exactly 3, just the way that Shizun likes it, with the exact size that Shizun likes it, and the exact filling that Shizun likes. And I cannot believe, like, guys, they even, just look at this here. Tell me that this is an innuendo. Meatbun was trying to insinuate something, right? Let's see, if we just go back here, it said right here, the person who had made the tangyuan seemed to know exactly how much his mouth could hold, the exact size the food needed to be in order to fit comfortably in his mouth, and even the gooey filling seemed to be mixed with untold intimacy. I'm not gonna say it, but I'm pretty sure you guys can figure out what Meatbun is alluding here. How Moran knew exactly how much tangyuan Chuaning's mouth could hold. Moran has some memory, some practice, some experience is why he knows this. And even Chuaning's a little flushed from it, thinking, what am I thinking? Why is my heart racing thinking about this? Bad thoughts go away. But yeah, Chuaning enjoys the sweets. He's just filled with love right now. He cannot believe that Moran remembers so many things about him and is just so caring and just such a good disciple. What such a good disciple. What a good husky boy. But yeah, actually, to be honest, even though it's called Dumb Husky, I feel like maybe 0.5 Moran or Tashin Jun is like a dumb husky. 1.0 is a dumb husky, but Moran 2.0 is a Labrador Retriever or a Golden Retriever. You know what I mean? The way, like, his personality is definitely a Golden Retriever. But yeah, he's just embarrassed. He even finds the book of letters that Moran had addressed to him. Moran wrote a letter for every single day that Chuaning was in seclusion, and he just talks about everything, his experiences throughout the years, and it gives Chuaning an opportunity to kind of fill in the gaps of what he's been missing. He got to kind of see Moran grow up in those 5 years because Moran documented everything. The travels he went to, the food he tried, the people he helped, the ghosts and demons he extinguished. It's so sweet and sentimental, and I think Chuaning is just realizing how much Moran has grown and matured over these years. And Moran himself is just thinking the same thing over and over. What can I do to please Shizun? Whatever he needs, he got it. If he wants it, he got it. I will be with him for the rest of my life. I will accompany him whether he wants me to or not. But yeah, I'm just so happy to see Chuaning finally getting the cuddling and the pampering and the love that he deserves. And I'm glad that Moran 2.0 is giving him all of that. Yeah, that's why Moran 2.0 is best boy. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's read along, and I will see you guys next time. Bye bye!